Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I want to tell you about a piece of physics discovered in 1838 by a Prussian meteorologist who almost certainly never imagined it would end up as one of the most downloaded audio categories on Spotify. Picture this. It is sometime around midnight. Someone, let's call her Eleanor, is lying in bed with her phone balanced on her chest and a pair of over-ear headphones clamped to her head. She has been awake for 40 minutes. Not anxious exactly, not in pain, just awake in that specific maddening way that every person reading or listening to this will recognize immediately. Her mind won't land. It keeps circling. And so she opens an app, scrolls past ocean waves and rain on tent, and lands on something called delta binaural beats, deep sleep induction. She presses play. She has no idea what a binaural beat is. She has no idea whether any of this will work. She only knows that she is tired and that the internet has told her this might help. The question I want to spend this episode answering is, what does the science actually say? There is a real story here. And like most good stories in sleep science, it starts with something unexpected. It starts with tuning forks. Let me begin with a simple question that almost nobody who uses binaural beats can answer. What precisely is one? Think of the last time you watched a helicopter pass overhead. As it approaches, the rotors are cutting through air at a certain speed. As it moves away, the sound shifts. Lower, slower. What you are perceiving is not just the helicopter itself, but the relationship between the helicopter's frequency and your ears. Now shrink that entire phenomenon down to something happening not between you and an aircraft, but between two invisible tones and your brainstem. That is something close to what a binaural beat is, except the sound you hear isn't physically real at all. Here is the exact mechanism. You put on stereo headphones. Into your left ear goes a tone of, say, 200 Hertz. Into your right ear goes a tone of 203 Hertz. Physically, those are two separate sounds, and your ears receive them as such. But deep in your brainstem, in a structure called the medial superior olivary nucleus, the first place in the entire auditory pathway where signals from both ears meet, something happens. That structure computes the difference between the two tones. It perceives a third tone at 3 Hertz that exists nowhere in the physical world. It is a ghost tone generated entirely inside your auditory system. No external source, no speaker could produce it. If you take those headphones off and play both tracks through a single speaker, the ghost disappears immediately. What you had was not a sound. It was an illusion created by your brain. That 3 Hertz phantom tone sits squarely in what we call the delta frequency band, the oscillatory range your brain naturally inhabits during the deepest, most physically restorative stage of sleep. And that correspondence between the frequency range of binaural beats and the frequency range of human brain waves is precisely why scientists became so interested in them. It raised a genuinely fascinating question. If your brain is perceiving a 3 Hertz pulse, will it start oscillating at 3 Hertz itself? And if it does that mean you can nudge a wakeful, restless brain toward a sleep-like state? Simply by listening to 2 slightly mismatched tones through a pair of headphones. That is the hypothesis. Whether it holds up is a different question, and one we'll get to. But first, a brief trip back in time, because this idea has a history that is, frankly, a little absurd. The year is 1838. Heinrich Wilhelm Dove, Prussian physicist, prolific scientific writer, future director of the Prussian Meteorological Institute, and, it must be said, not someone who had sleep improvement on his mind, was experimenting with pairs of tuning forks. he placed one fork at each ear, each vibrating at a slightly different frequency, and he noticed something strange. The listener did not hear two separate tones. They heard one combined sound with a slow, rhythmic quality that couldn't be explained by the physics of either fork. The effect was internally generated, a subjective perception with no external acoustic correlate. And then, as far as mainstream science was concerned, the world moved on. The binaural beat sat in the literature for 135 years like a curiosity in a museum case, real, verifiable, and almost entirely ignored. The revival came in 1973. A biophysicist named Gerald Oster published a paper that changed everything. Oster didn't just re-describe what had previously been observed. He synthesized a century of scattered research, put the phenomenon in the context of modern neuroscience, and made a series of proposals that were, for 1973, remarkably prescient. He suggested binaural beats might serve as a neurological diagnostic tool. He noticed that people varied enormously in their sensitivity to the beats, and that this variation correlated with things like hormonal state and neurological health. And he identified the phenomenon as a window onto fundamental questions about how the brain localizes sound and processes competing sensory inputs. Oster's paper is the reference that appears at the start of essentially every serious binaural beat study published in the last 50 years. He didn't discover them, but he made the scientific world take them seriously. That is arguably the more valuable contribution. Discovery is common, persuasion is rare.
So for, it must be at least a decade now, I have been an avid, probably more like rabid consumer of protein shakes. But the hard thing, honestly, in the supplement space, if you really understand and do your diligence, is this critical thing called trust. It is very hard to find a brand that you can truly trust. That's when I came across the company Puri and the really impressive founder. Even though I'm sure it makes them less profit versus other quick and loose companies, Puri takes quality more seriously than any company I've ever seen before. They have so many offerings, protein powders galore, but lots of other additions. But that's what I was focusing on here. Why did I choose them? Well, it's really for 4 specific reasons. Number 1, they are free from hormones. Number 2, they are free from GMOs. Number 3, they are free of any pesticides. And number 4, and this is the critical confidence part, every single batch is third-party tested for over 200 harmful contaminants, things like heavy metals, etc. All you have to do if you are a neurotic nerd like me, you can even scan the QRI code on the back of the product to get the third-party independent laboratory test results. That's how much trust and confidence they place in their product. By the way, if you want a recommendation, go for the dark chocolate flavored protein powder. It's just exceptional. In fact, it's wonderfully addictive. I didn't just say that. Anyway, it delivers 21 grams of protein per serving. And for folks of my podcast right now, you can save 20%. So go over to puri.com/Matt Walker, and that is spelled PUORI.com, Matt Walker. So again, that is PUORI.com/Matt Walker, and you will get 20% off your product.
Let us talk about the mechanism in a little more depth, because this is where things get both genuinely interesting and complicated. Imagine a mixing desk. On most mixing desks, the sounds coming in through different channels are blended together at the board itself. And what comes out of the speakers is a single combined signal. That is how your auditory system handles most sounds. Different acoustic inputs get mixed, integrated, processed, but the binaural beat phenomenon is different. It is more like a situation where the mixing desk doesn't process the signals until they have each traveled separately all the way to a specific room deep inside the building. That room, the medial superior olivary nucleus in the brainstem, is the first place in the entire human auditory pathway where input from both ears arrives simultaneously. It is there that the difference between the two tones is computed. It is there that the phantom beat is born. However, it is not processed at the level of conscious attention. It is computed at the level of brainstem reflexes. You cannot decide not to hear it. The proposed mechanism by which all of this might influence sleep is called the frequency following response. The idea is this: the brain has a tendency to synchronize its own oscillatory activity with rhythmic external stimuli, a phenomenon called entrainment. It happens with light. It happens with sound. The proposal is that when your brainstem generates a 3 Hertz binaural beat, your cortex may begin to oscillate at 3 Hertz in resonance, essentially being coaxed toward the delta wave activity of deep sleep by the phantom tone your own auditory system produced. That is the hypothesis. Here is where the scientific honesty comes in. The evidence for it is, and I want to be precise here, not dismissive, genuinely mixed. Review 14 rigorously selected studies examining whether binaural beats actually entrain brain oscillations in the way the hypothesis predicts. And the scorecard looks like this. 5 studies found results consistent with entrainment. 8 found results contradicting it. 1 found a mixture. That is not the evidence base of a mechanism we can call established. It is the evidence base of a mechanism that might be real, might operate differently than we think, or might not be the primary pathway through which binaural beats produce their effects at all. But here is the important nuance, and this is why the story doesn't end there. The absence of confirmed electroencephalogram, or EEG, entrainment does not mean binaural beats do nothing. Research examining the effects of binaural beats at multiple levels of the auditory pathway as simultaneously, from brainstem responses all the way up to large-scale brain connectivity, found something unexpected. Binaural beats did produce distinctive patterns of functional connectivity that monaural beats did not. The brain was responding differently. The mechanism just might not be the simple frequency following story that has been doing the rounds on wellness websites. Whether the effects operate through connectivity, autonomic modulation, or some combination of indirect pathways remains an open question. An open question in science is not the same as no. Now, I want to spend a moment on something that comes up regularly in this space, because it is a genuine source of confusion. The difference between binaural beats and the colored noises, white noise, pink noise, brown noise, that have separately attracted scientific and popular interest as sleep aids. Think of white noise as the acoustic equivalent of a blank canvas, equal energy at every frequency across the audible spectrum. No peaks, no valleys, flat, hissing, democratic distribution of sound that treats a low rumble and a high squeal with identical authority. Pink noise tilts that canvas. It has progressively more energy at lower frequencies. A 3 decibel reduction per octave as you move up the spectrum, which gives it the warmer, more textured quality many people find in rainfall or a distant waterfall. Both can be played through speakers. Both require no headphones. Both operate primarily by filling the acoustic space with a consistent background. Binaural beats do none of that. They are not masking devices. They generate no physical sound of their own. They require stereo headphones, strictly, because the entire effect depends on the two tonal inputs being kept physically separate, one to each ear, until they meet inside the brainstem. Play them through speakers, and the tones mix in the air before they reach your ears. The ghost beat disappears. What you are left with is a monaural beat, a different phenomenon with a different neural mechanism and a different evidence base. A systematic review of auditory stimulation and sleep published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine is explicit on this point. It classified binaural beats and noise-based interventions as categorically separate and excluded binaural beats from its analysis of white and pink noise entirely. They are not variants of the same thing. They are different tools with different mechanisms, different requirements, and different research bases. Understanding that distinction is essential for making sense of either body of evidence. What works for one will not necessarily work for the other. They are as different mechanistically as a massage and a sauna, both potentially relaxing, both potentially useful, but operating through entirely different pathways. A long-standing partner of today's podcast is Element, spelled L-M-N-T. Element is a sugar-free electrolyte drink mix, and for me, it was the sugar-free part that made me start using it a while back. And again, I buy my own supply just to stay objective. Beyond having the electrolytes in the right balance, the other reason I'm a fan of Element is that it's scientific. If you look up the people who created the company, you'll find some pretty heavy-hitting physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology knowledge baked into the product. And again, all of that comes without any sugar. Now, here's the update. Element's lemonade salt flavor, which used to be seasonal, was so popular that it's now permanent. You can get it year-round. Happily, I badgered them, and they have agreed to give you fine folks a free 8-count sample pack with any purchase of Element if you use the link drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. So for free product with your purchase, just visit drinklmnt.com/Matt Walker. And as I said, you'll get some free product. Now, the question that brought Elena to her phone at midnight, and that brings most people to this topic: do binaural beats actually improve sleep? Let me give you the full picture, starting with what the evidence supports and ending with the places where it does not. One of the important studies in this field, because it uses the gold standard of sleep measurement, polysomnography, examined what happens when you deliver a 3 Hertz binaural beat throughout an entire night of sleep. The researchers compared nights with and without the binaural beat, while also controlling carefully for the fact that sleeping in a laboratory takes some getting used to. The result was this: a statistically significant increase in deep, non-rapid eye movement sleep. This stage, also called slow wave sleep, is the deepest, most physically restorative stage of sleep. It is the stage most powerfully associated with immune restoration, growth hormone release, metabolic regulation, and other body and brain functions. Getting more of it is not a trivial benefit. And this study showed, using electrode-based brain measurement, not a questionnaire, that a specific binaural beat frequency could reliably increase how much of it participants obtained. That finding has since been independently replicated. Track 9 university students across 2 nights, one baseline, one with 1 to 4 Hertz binaural beats delivered for 30 minutes before sleep. And the same pattern emerges. a statistically significant increase in deep, non-rapid eye movement sleep, and a corresponding decrease in light, non-rapid eye movement sleep, suggesting the brain shifted from a lighter stage of sleep to a deeper stage rather than simply sleeping longer. Two independent research groups in two different countries using polysomnographic measurement pointing in the same direction. A different study took aim at a different part of the sleep problem, not the depth of sleep once you are under, but the time it takes to get there. 12 healthy participants each experienced 4 90-minute afternoon nap sessions, a sham condition with no sound, and 3 binaural beat conditions at different very low frequencies, the most effective being 0.25 Hertz, well below the conventional delta range. The 0.25 Hertz condition produced significantly shorter latencies to both light and deep non-rapid eye movement sleep, meaning simply participants fell into deep sleep faster. There is a wrinkle in this finding that I find genuinely fascinating. Despite the sleep onset benefit, there was no detectable EEG entrainment at 0.25 Hertz. The brain was not following the frequency, yet the effect on sleep was real. This suggests the mechanism may not be the simple resonance story, the brain tuning itself like a radio to a frequency. Instead, the benefit may come through indirect pathways, autonomic nervous system calming, mood regulation, a general reduction in the arousal that delays sleep onset. The precise mechanism remains an open scientific question, but the phenomenon itself, faster access to deep sleep, appears to be real. Beyond the laboratory, researchers have examined what happens when people actually use binaural beats as they would in the real world, nightly over weeks in populations with genuine sleep problems. Follow 20 university students for 2 weeks, the first week with no intervention, the second with 90 minutes of delta frequency binaural beats before sleep each night, and the results are consistent. Significant reductions in how long it takes to fall asleep, significant reductions in the number of times people wake during the night, and improvements in overall sleep satisfaction. Extend the time horizon to 8 weeks and study a group of young elite athletes, people for whom sleep quality is not just a wellness preference, but a performance critical variable. And the picture is similar. Significantly improved subjective sleep quality and awakening quality in the binaural beat group compared to controls.
I had a realization about a year ago. I, perhaps unsurprisingly, go on and on about what happens during sleep for recovery, things like growth hormone release and muscle repair, but I don't think I talk enough about what's happening in your body in the hours before sleep that sets up recovery or sabotages it during the night. And poor circulation, and here we're talking sort of swollen legs and inflammation in the lower extremities, all of that makes it harder for your body to do its job overnight. And especially if you're like me, I can be standing a lot of the time, I can be lecturing, I'm in and around the lab, I can be standing at my office desk. And furthermore, I do travel a fair amount, and those long haul flights can result in blood pooling in the legs. And as a result, you kind of almost feel as though you get leg claustrophobia, if that's almost a word. I don't think it is, but I think you probably know what I mean. That's why I ended up switching to something called hollow socks. And here's their secret sauce. Their compression socks are made from baby alpaca fiber, which is really soft, breathable. But the critical part is it has a graduated compression that actually promotes blood flow without strangling your legs to that point of suffocation. And I wore them recently on a 10-hour flight and genuinely forgot I'd had them on, whereas with the compression socks normally, I always have that sense that they're there. And over 2 million pairs sold, and known medically that they are trusted by doctors. They are made in the United States, and for a limited time,
HoloSocks is having a buy two, get two free sale. So head over to holosocks.com. That's holosocks.com for 50% off. And if you can, just tell them that I sent you here, and that will help the show a little bit. But overall, just go and buy the socks. They're fantastic. holosocks.com.
Move to a clinical population, 64 older adults with poor sleep quality living in a long-term care institution, and run a proper randomized controlled trial with a music-only active control. And the result is this: significant improvements in sleep quality, significant reductions in depressive symptoms, and a measurable reduction in sympathetic nervous activity, the physiological marker of arousal, in the binaural beat group compared to the music-only group. The fact that the control condition was active music, not silence, is important. It means the binaural beat component, specifically, not just the music, was driving the additional benefit. So far, the picture is fairly encouraging, but proper science demands that we include the null results. And there is one here that deserves its own paragraph: the most rigorously controlled study in the entire sleep-specific binaural beat literature, randomized, double-blind, sham-controlled, with a validated clinical outcome measure, examined whether theta frequency binaural beats helped people with subclinical insomnia sleep better. 43 participants, 2 weeks of listening nightly to music with or without a 6 Hertz theta binaural beat embedded. The primary outcome, insomnia severity, decreased in both groups, but the difference between them was not statistically significant. The binaural beat condition did show a numerically larger effect, and the EEG data suggested the brain was responding differently. But on the measure that matters clinically, how much better did people sleep? The answer was not significantly more than music alone. 2 final pieces before we bring Elena back. The first is a matter of time. If you pool the studies together and sort them by how long participants actually listened, a threshold appears in the data, somewhere around 8 or 9 minutes. Below that line, almost nothing works. Above it, the effects begin to accumulate. The studies that found the clearest benefits used 30 minutes, an hour, or the whole night. The ones that found nothing often gave participants a brief burst and called it an exposure. A rhythm heard briefly is just a sound. A rhythm heard long enough becomes an instruction. The second piece is harder to talk about because it complicates the tidy story everyone wants. People respond to binaural beats very differently, not randomly, differently in ways that track real biology. Baseline dopamine levels, indexed by something as mundane as how often you blink, predict who benefits. Gender matters. Oster noticed this in 1973. Age matters. Older ears perceive the beat less readily, which means that every population level average in this field is hiding a widespread underneath it. Some people in those studies improved a great deal. Some improved not at all. The average was the average of 2 different experiences folded together. The most thorough review of this literature, published in 2025, looked at 12 randomized controlled trials. 8 showed a clear benefit. 4 showed nothing. The reviewers drew the only honest conclusion available. Binaural beats are promising, low risk, and worth taking seriously. But the evidence has not yet earned the right to be called a clinical recommendation. No one has established the right frequency, the right duration, or the right protocol. That is not a failure of the field. It is the field being precise about what it knows, which is more than most of the internet can say, which brings us back to Elena. What can we tell her, honestly? Several things: that the sound she is listening to is a real neurological phenomenon, discovered with tuning forks in 1838, taken seriously by science for the last 50 years, that if she is going to do this, the delta range, 1 to 4 Hertz, is her best bet, and 30 minutes is probably the floor. That the headphones are not a style choice, but a requirement, because without them, there is no ghost tone to hear, and that the mechanism may ultimately matter less than she thinks. Whether her brain is in training to the beat or simply being soothed by the auditory equivalent of a slow, even breath, the outcomes across multiple polysomnographic studies converge. More slow wave sleep, faster onset, fewer awakenings. But she should also know what this is not. Binaural beats are not a pharmaceutical in audio clothing. They are not a replacement for a regular schedule, a darkened bedroom, or the clinical care that serious insomnia deserves. They are something smaller and more modest, a low-cost, low-harm addition to a toolkit, a gentle tap on the shoulder of a restless nervous system. Sometimes that is enough. The field will sharpen. The studies are getting larger, the blinding tighter, the individual differences taken more seriously. In a few years, we will know better who this works for, at what frequency, and for how long. But here is what we already know. A Prussian meteorologist placed 2 tuning forks beside 2 ears in 1838 and heard something that was not there. A biophysicist in 1973 insisted the rest of us take it seriously, and tonight, somewhere in a darkened room with a phone glowing against a chest and a pair of over-ear headphones doing their quiet work, a mind that would not stop circling is finally beginning to let go. That, to me, is rather a good story. Thanks so much for listening. I really do appreciate you tuning in. Please take care of yourself, enjoy your waking days, and sleep a sound sleep tonight. Bye for now.